Dr. Graham is the Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Winston-Salem State University. He is also on the Professional Educator Standards and Preparation Commission here in North Carolina and is the chairperson for Governor Cooper's DRIVE Task Force. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Graham.
Thank you, Leah. Good morning, everyone. We are pleased to have you join us for this session of the 2020 North Carolina Education Innovation Lab. We will continue our focus on issues relative to teacher recruitment during this segment. As you know, national research data suggests that the recruitment of new teachers remains a persistent issue, especially teachers of color. North Carolina is not immune to this reality. Nothing illustrates this truth more than Governor Cooper's formation of the DRIVE Task Force, or the Developing a Representative and Inclusive Vision for Education, that I am honored to chair. This task force focuses intentionally on issues of teacher recruitment, preparation, support, and retention specifically for the great state of North Carolina. We know that 80% of the nation's teachers' workforce is white, and in the state of North Carolina, 81% of students enrolled in educator preparation programs in 2018 were white, and 86% of those who were licensed through an educator preparation program that year were white. Therefore, it is imperative that we continue to seek information and learn more about initiatives and programs that leverage best practice, not only to recruit teachers into the profession, but also ways in which we can tie the recruitment of those teachers to the support and retention of classroom teachers downrange. We are fortunate then this morning to have joined us Mr. Zachary Levine, Executive Director of Teach. Mr. Levine is a recognized expert of teacher recruitment issues in which he's been immersed for the past 5 years. For his work founding and serving as Executive Director of Elevated, a nonprofit focused on inspiring college STEM majors to join the teaching profession, he was awarded the Stanford Social Innovation Fellowship and Entrepreneur Residency at New Schools Venture Fund. Prior to Elevated, Mr. Levine led teacher recruitment and hiring for the largest charter school organization in Los Angeles, Green Dot Public Schools. He has also worked in operations role at Uncommon Schools in New York. Before I turn the floor over to Mr. Levine, I ask that you please take time during this presentation to jot your questions, and we will circle back and engage in a question and answer segment at the conclusion of the discussion. Mr. Levine, we are honored to have you join us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. I'm thrilled to be here. I really appreciate all of you having me and really excited to dive in and talk to you a little bit more about the future teacher pipeline, what we can do to build the future teacher pipeline. So in today's presentation, I'm gonna talk about why we're leaking talent from this pipeline, how we can plug those leaks, and I'm gonna be sharing some excerpts from our research about misperceptions of teaching, barriers to getting people into the teaching profession, and then messaging that actually works to motivate people to make it through the pipeline, and maybe suggest a few actions that we can do together to build the future pipeline. So in Brenda's intro, I think she already introduced the Teach NC partnership, so I don't need to repeat that, but I will say that a lot of the solutions that I'm going to speak to today come from Teach NC partnership. So Teach, the organization I run, has done a great deal of research, and that research informs Teach NC and strategies for getting more people into the profession. It's focus groups, surveys, literature review, best practice studies on recruiting organizations. And, you know, we look into what does Generation Z and what do millennials or Generation Y want in a career? How do they currently perceive teaching? What messages actually work to motivate them? And what are their barriers? And how do they communicate? What is the best way to communicate with them? And what's the best way to recruit them into a career? So I'm going to be sharing a lot of highlights from that research today. So when we talk about case studies, we looked at, first of all, the US Army, which is one of the most sophisticated recruiting organizations in the country. We also looked at the UK because they had a successful nationwide teacher recruitment drive, and then some research coming out of ASU in terms of best practices for recruiting teachers. So one of the first things that came when we looked at both the Army and the UK campaign is that both of them deployed a comprehensive system for getting people into the future teacher pipeline and through it. And that comprehensive system was comprehensive in the sense that it had advertising, it had online digital interactions with potential future teachers, and it had in-person interactions. It had all three of those, and it had those three components all working in concert with each other. The second thing was that it was, in both cases, it was extremely important to just deeply study and understand your target audience, not just messaging to them what you think they want to hear, but actually testing the messaging and digging in deep and finding out what they need to hear. The third key to success was really not just understanding that nobody's going to get recruited through one interaction or one touch, that it's going to take, recruitment is really multiple touches, and that those touches, those interactions are going to occur over a period of months and really in many cases years. So in order to be able to do that, there has to be enabling technology, the technology that would enable you to keep track of hundreds or thousands of prospects, to keep in touch with them and communicate with them over time. So Teach NC was actually designed with all these best practices in mind. So this next piece of research actually really shocked me when we did it, when we found this out. So we surveyed high GPA college students nationwide and found that 39% of them were at least somewhat interested in teaching. So we did a 5-point interest scale. So 39% were 3 or higher. This is obviously a huge opportunity in that you have almost 40% of your population open, but most of these individuals do not go on to become teachers. We lose them. We don't convert on their initial interest. So that's what we mean by leaks in the pipeline, because instead of going from initial interest to consideration to decision, applying to an ed prep program, earning a license, and finding a job, we estimate that we lose at least 60% of those who have interest, and they don't actually convert that interest into I'm deciding to become a teacher. Now, of the ones that do decide to become a teacher, we still lose about 50% of those, half of those, because of friction in the process of becoming a teacher. So we have to do something to plug the leaks. I'm having trouble clicking this. Okay, here we go. Oops. Too many clicks. So Teach NC is about plugging these leaks, and it's designed absolutely with the necessity and the goal of diversifying the profession in mind. So Teach NC tries to identify individuals who have this initial interest, then cultivate their interest so they get to the decision phase of, yes, I want to do this. And then for those people who are yeses, who are decideds, support them through the process. And I'm going to talk throughout this presentation about the specific ways that we can identify, cultivate, and support. So on the identify front, it's a suite of strategies. Number one, digital ads, websites, search engines, social media, to reach people who are these people who are considering and have an interest in teaching. Number two, actually, let's see. So advertisements through TV and radio, PSA advertisements in more traditional media. Number three, social media content that's actually more in depth and would go out through our partner network. I'm figuring out how these slides work. And then number four, partnerships with school districts and universities to do direct outreach. to their students. So all of these identification strategies send people to teach.org, which is delivering tools and supports that will then further cultivate interest for prospects. And I'm going to talk about those specifically in the presentation. The crucial thing about teach.org is that we have to get people to subscribe or create an account. We have to get their contact information. And that's crucial because, as I said, we're going to need to have multiple interactions with people over time, over months or even years. So once we have people's information, contact information, we have to cultivate them. So this piece of research gives some information about what we need to do when we cultivate folks. So first of all, this research asked people to identify, it was based on college students, what is their most valued attributes in a job? What do they care the most about? And you see here on the screen what the top 6 most valued attributes were. Then it asked these respondents to rate how they perceive teaching. Did they rate teaching highly on these dimensions that matter? And here you can see that the respondents were subdivided into ones that were planning to go be a teacher. They wanted to be a teacher. Their responses are in orange, the percent that rated teaching highly. And then those who were planning to go do something else, some other career. And their responses are here in gray. And as you can see, the ones that plan to teach were 1.5 to 2 times more likely to perceive teaching positively on these dimensions that matter. And so this is why we need to actually target perceptions. To cultivate interest, we need to target the perceptions on these dimensions of teaching and show how teaching meets these dimensions. So if we kind of dig further into the idea of shifting perceptions of the teaching profession, and we look at our research around current perceptions and really what I would call the negative stereotype, typical perceptions of the teaching profession, we need to sort of shift from what we might call the martyr brand, so underpaid and overworked, and shift perceptions to enabling people to see teachers as the entrepreneurs and the leaders that they really are. So this means that we need to, instead of seeing teaching as the task of taking care of children, which certainly the children are in the teacher's care, but it's actually a leadership exercise and it involves an immense amount of expertise. We need to shift perceptions from people misperceiving it as not intellectually stimulating to realizing it's incredibly intellectually challenging. We need to shift from seeing it as repetitious to entrepreneurial and creative, shift from seeing it as, hey, I don't want to be stuck in one job forever, to realizing that there's a lot of growth and career path opportunities, and shift from seeing it as maybe isolating to the fact that you actually can collaborate with cool coworkers. So now I'm going to actually show an advertisement of Teach NC that focuses on, in particular, this key misperception, the idea that teaching isn't intellectually stimulating or creative, which came up in focus groups and surveys. And this ad demonstrates that teaching is actually filled with a lot of problem solving and creativity. Let's see technologically if this ad comes through.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him with 1/4 of 1/2 while I was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school.
Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
So we actually tested the effectiveness of this ad by having some Nielsen, which is a company's Nielsen neuroscientists, hook up some brain and eye monitoring technology to viewers as they watch the ads. So they're watching the ad, they have this equipment hooked up to them, and this is measuring their emotional resonance in their memory activation and their attention processing. And here you're looking at, in 1 second, an excerpt from the report. And what you can see on the left is actually, it's a heat map from the eye tracking. And then on the right, the scores on these different dimensions. And anything over a 5 was considered an effective ad. Now, more recently, we did some research to test new messages that would be relevant post-COVID. And we wanted to know not only what messages were the most motivating, but actually which messages worked best for different race groups and which messages were the most motivating for different age groups. So these were 6 just kind of core idea messages, right? That's not a full, complete message, but sort of core ideas. And I'm going to share with you the results of that research. So the 6 messages were: 1, our future depends on our teachers. 2, which is B, so let's use the letters. B, teachers are change makers who are reinventing education, especially now. C, teachers are indispensable and always in high demand. D, be essential, be on the front lines of the country's recovery efforts. E, amazing careers start in the classroom. F, teachers are bodacious experts. So here's the results. To my surprise, one single message actually came up as the most motivating for all 3 race groups and for both millennials and Generation Z. And that's the dark blue bar representing message A, which was our future depends on our teachers. Now, the second most chosen message was B, the light blue bar, which was teachers are reinventing education. And that was true for every single one of the subgroups except for Black millennials, okay? So given that 2 messages just performed extremely strong across the board, the ad agency, our ad team, is going to combine them to become the core idea behind the next ads for Teach NC. So becoming a teacher is an opportunity to shape the future, reinvent the modern classroom, and prepare society for tomorrow's challenges. And that just shows you an example of this idea, of course, of studying the target audience, making sure we know which messages resonate. Now, I've just talked a lot about messaging and media. Another way that we can cultivate prospects' interest in teaching is to have them speak with current teachers. It's pretty basic and it's extremely effective. And it's important that they're speaking with someone who ultimately is having this role model effect on them. In other words, they're speaking with someone that they are impressed by, looking up to, and can see themselves in. And so we offer free one-on-one coaching with teachers. And this format has proven to be extremely effective. The teachers do it over phone or video call, and over 70% of prospects who participate in these calls report that they are much more interested in teaching after they have one of these one-on-one conversations. Another thing that we do and can do more of to cultivate people is to show them role models in a panel format and hearing from current educators. So this was an example of a panel that was specifically for and targeting future Black teachers, or people who were at least considering teaching careers. And we had 3 phenomenal Black educators, and they were able to speak to why they went into the teaching profession and what it's like for them in ways that really powerfully resonated. Sharif El-Mekki, who was a teacher and then a principal, and now his current title is listed, but he said that what he wanted to do was be an activist and improve his community. And in college, he was planning to be a lawyer. He thought that law was the best way to create change and be an activist. And then he met a teacher who actually helped him see that teaching is really one of the best forms of activism. And that changed his course, and became a teacher and found that was absolutely the case. So in addition to media, messaging, exposure to role models, another way to cultivate interest is just, of course, to get people, what we say, onto the field, get them some practice and trying it out. And this can be in the form of extracurricular tutoring, an internship where you're teaching children, it's a summer internship where you're teaching summer school, or workshop format. So just to sort of recap how we can actually plug leaks at the cultivation stage: research-based messaging that shifts perceptions, multimedia in all formats, and lots of it, exposure to role models, and tryout experiences. Now, for those folks who we've successfully cultivated and their answer is, yes, I want to be a teacher, they're still facing barriers, and there's 4 main entry barriers that we need to address. 1, friction in the process of finding, researching, and choosing an ed prep program that particularly fits that individual's needs. Number 2, perceiving and being able to afford the paying for an ed prep program. 3, getting through the application process, understanding it, navigating it. It's actually more confusing than one would think sometimes, and getting through that. And then taking and passing the licensure exams. And Teach NC provides supports for each of these barriers. So the first barrier, choosing an ed prep program. We can provide a guide that breaks it down, the different pathways, the different options, and helping people how they should think about this, how they can do this research. Secondly, providing profiles for every ed prep program option available. Make it simple, compiled in one place, have the comparison research be facilitated by these profiles. And then offering chat support and phone support. Other strategies that other stakeholders can do or are doing, even outside of Teach NC, is, of course, the ed prep program dashboards. And then activating high school guidance counselors and the community college sponsored career coaches that reach high school students to know and understand how to counsel students with an interest in teaching and how to help guide them. In terms of the barrier of perceiving that it's affordable, what we can do and what we do is provide a guide that helps everyone in North Carolina who's interested know every scholarship and financial assistance opportunity that's available to them, because it can actually be more affordable than you think when you know all of these options. Secondly, we actually provide fee reimbursements for just a reimbursement for applying. There's fees to every program when you apply, and we want to get rid of that barrier. And then also the chat support and the phone support, which kind of helps people troubleshoot across the board, regardless of what question or issue they're encountering. So other strategies that help on this is NC Teaching Fellows. I think people may be familiar with that program. And then all the state and actually local scholarships that North Carolina has in place and could use some more. So finally, the application process. There's a tool that helps people navigate each Ed Prep programs specific application process, the chat and phone support that I mentioned. And then of course, other strategies are simplifying the Ed Prep program, simplifying their application, or just referring people to the Teach NC tools. Finally, on the licensure exams, what we provide is one, a guide for how to prepare, because truthfully, if you know how to prepare, that's half the battle. And then actual resources that help prospects prepare and be fully prepared, and online courses. Other strategies are actually maybe reforming or changing the exams that are required, and certainly looking at it through an equity lens and eliminating any bias that could be in the exams. So I had mentioned that one of the tools was this application navigator, and we piloted this tool with 4 Ed Prep programs before we rolled it out more widely. And we were really surprised, because what we found was that in those 4 Ed Prep programs, the normal sort of status quo percentage of application starters, people who start an application to these programs, who actually complete and submit the application, was 56%, which means, of course, that there's a huge leak there. 44% are so interested that they start an application, but they don't complete the application. However, for people who started an application and then used the support that was provided, the application navigator tool, 78% completed. So that was an increase of 39%. And it just shows you this idea that there are several points where you can have a leak, and it's really important to support each and every one of those points. And you can, even with a relatively low lift intervention, make big progress and big gains. So this is a detailed slide. I'm not going to read this in detail. This is an example of one prospect who goes through and interacts with the supports through the identification stage, cultivation stage, and convert stage. And really just what it highlights is that recruitment is this multiple touch process, and that it's not one interaction. It's trying to interact with this recruit for actually 2 years over their junior and senior year. I think what I just want to maybe close on and turn it over to Q&A and a conversation with Dr. Graham is just a couple ideas for future actions and action planning and what we could do to build the future pipeline. So at the start of the presentation, I mentioned, of course, that surveys are showing us that 30 to 40% of college students and high school students are open to the teaching profession or somewhat interested. So what if every single high school in the state of North Carolina asked every single junior and senior, what is your interest level in the teaching profession? And if they were interested, refers them to teachnc.org to get cultivated, to get resources to help them explore and supports on their journey. We also can leverage career technical education programming and have there be CTE coursework at the high school level to expose high school students to the teaching profession. Teacher cadet programs, there are some of them, but there could be a lot more. Number 2, asking every single community college and university in the state of North Carolina to similarly reach out to their students and just find out who's interested. Because if we can't identify these 30 to 40%, then we can't cultivate them. But if we can identify them, then there's a huge opportunity in that. Number 3, these tryout experiences that I had mentioned. So summer school internships, meaning college students, let's say, having a summer internship teaching middle school students, or some role where they get to be a teaching assistant in the classroom. These exist, but we could use a lot more of them. And then finally, what if we reimagined and streamlined licensure requirements? Because we do know that there's friction at that stage as well. So with that, I'd love to turn it back over to Dr. Graham.
Mr. Levine, fantastic presentation, very informative. Um, I learned a great deal, so I'm very thankful to have had the opportunity to listen and engage with you today. We have about 8 minutes before we begin to transition everyone into your breakout session, so we don't have a great deal of time for question and answer. But if you have some questions, I will ask that you please submit those in the chat area, and we will monitor those and pose those questions to Mr. Levine. I'm going to cheat, actually, and I apologize for doing so, but I'm going to take full advantage of my posture here. Mr. Levine, I have a question for you relative to universities, four-year institutions of higher education. As a provost at a university, I know that our admissions office is tasked with going out and recruiting students for the university in general, not necessarily for our educator preparation program specifically. So I'm curious to know what you might share for university leaders like me and other provosts and chancellors and our admissions offices at our universities about what we can learn from the work you've been doing to integrate into our admissions and recruitment efforts to bring in more students specifically for our educator preparation programs. What strategies or approaches would you say focus on these particular pieces of information, and hopefully we can see increases in our enrollment in our educator preparation programs?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I'm glad you asked that, because I would love to see universities thinking like this, right? Like, how do we proactively recruit more students into our program? So what I would say is this piece about first knowing and identifying the students that have an interest in the teaching profession, the high school students. If we have that knowledge and information, then those students could be reached out to ideally by your college of education, right? Or somebody who's either an advisor in your college of education, or in some cases, I think letting them speak with a student who's in the college of education, as in an education program, right? So I think making a personal connection between either a staff member or a student who's in the college of education, just to have a conversation. And so that becomes similar to the one-on-one conversations that we've been hosting between a prospect and a future teacher. Well, it would be really powerful for a recruit, a high school student, to have a one-on-one conversation with a pre-service teacher, someone who's in one of your programs, or a staff member. And if they form that personal connection, have a personal conversation, I actually think they'll be a lot more likely to become interested in your university.
Great, thank you for that response. We have a question in the chat. During your presentation, you mentioned apply to ed prep program. This person is seeking some clarity. Do you mean apply to a university and indicate education as a major, or formal admission into an educator preparation program, which may not occur until the junior year?
More the latter, right? So of course, if it's the undergrad pathway, they're applying into a major, and that could happen in their junior year, sometimes earlier. Or if we're talking about a post-baccalaureate pathway, it could be applying to a master's program or a non-master's credential program. So all three: undergrad, master's, non-master's, post-baccalaureate.
Great. I'm scanning the scanning the chat area, and I don't think I see any other questions here. So what I'd like to do, again, Mr. Levine, what you've shared as the chair of the Drive Task Force, you actually have helped me and my task force members significantly. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Drive Task Force, Governor Cooper established this task force as part of his executive order number 113, and charged us with advising his office on strategies that would address matters of equity and inclusion within education for the state of North Carolina. So we have a 32-member task force with representatives spanning a number of different areas. The K-12 sector, we have teachers, principals, superintendents. We have individuals from the higher education sector, from the public and private four-year institutions of higher education, as well as our community colleges. We have early childhood representatives, we have parents, we have policymakers, and we've been tasked with submitting to the governor by January 1, 2021, a plan that really assesses the state's progress toward increasing K-12 public school educator diversity. And included in that plan must be short-term, midterm, and long-term strategies to increase educator diversity. So a lot of what you've shared this morning, Mr. Levine, is information that we can leverage as part of the plan that we're working to conceive and conceptualize for the governor. And I cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise and really thanking you for the work that you're doing in this space. I don't think we do enough work in terms of analyzing, are we thinking about audiences and how those different audiences receive information and how they respond to information and the different platforms that we can leverage to engage those different types of audiences. So what you're doing is truly, truly groundbreaking work. And I want to extend my sincere appreciation, not only as the chair of the Drive Task Force, but just as a citizen of the state of North Carolina, who's very concerned with the efforts that we take as a state to recruit more people into the teaching profession. So thank you so very much for joining us this morning. At this point in time, I am going to turn this over to Leah and kind of give us some directions on the breakouts.
Great. Dr. Graham, thank you. Zach, thank you so much for sharing this information. Just a great opportunity to think about how we're communicating about the teaching profession, as you mentioned, and messaging to those folks who are interested. We're glad to hear that there is a good deal of interest in our young people. There are a couple of things in the chat just to highlight for you. Princess has shared the link to Teach NC, so you can check out the resources there. We encourage you to explore. And if you would like to make an account so you can see all the features that are there. Also, Allison, thank you for sending the link to the Drive Task Force information. If you have not been following that work, we encourage you to do so. You can take a look at the meetings and all the previous work that's been going on as they continue forward for an action plan there.